Oh, what another wonderful Saturday it was in college football. We're going to break it all down right here on Locked On NFL Draft. Let's go.
Let's go.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. Welcome into another edition of Locked On NFL Draft. It's the three best friends that anybody could have. I don't sing very often because I can't sing, but I will try. You see former NFL, AFL defensive back Eric Crocker. Give him the peace sign, just so we know. There he is right there. Ryan Tracy at Ryan Tracy NFL with the hat backwards. You guys look really cool with your hats backwards. Maybe I should flip mine around so I can look just like you guys. I'll keep it this way for now. And I'm John Harris, football analyst and sideline reporter for the Houston Texans. You can see the logo right there. I'm also an operator of footballtakeover.com. Gentlemen, it was another Saturday weekend. It wasn't as pumped up, seemingly, as October 15th was. Well, the great games we had on October 15th. But October 29th paid off in one very big way in Happy Valley, Pennsylvania. I don't even know it's called State College, and Happy Valley is just the term used for that particular area. But that 60 minutes of Ohio State, Penn State might have been as intriguing as any 60 minutes. And not because it was a close game, not because it was Ohio State winning, none of that. It was just the particular prospects in that game that, and we usually on Monday give pumped up, roughed up. And I think pumped up for Ohio State. We start, obviously, with defensive end JT Tuimoloau. I think I got it. Did I get it? I hope I got it. What just a tremendous game for Ohio State. Now, he's a second-year sophomore. So then you start thinking, okay, who else is pumped up in that game? Marvin Harrison Jr. was absolutely fantastic. And that's going to lead to the discussion of what Marvin Harrison Jr.'s emergence, along with Emeka Egbuka, along with Julian Fleming, and what that means for JSN, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, going forward, because he didn't play in that game, and Ohio State, quite honestly, didn't miss him. So, gentlemen, let's dive right in. Eric, I want to start with, you know what, let's start with CJ Stroud, quarterback for Ohio State. Going against Penn State, didn't do a ton. He made the throws he needed to make. Whenever a clutch situation came up, Marvin Harrison Jr. became that guy. So, two parts. Number one, CJ Stroud, thoughts? Part two, is Marvin Harrison Jr. the best player in college football right now, regardless of grade and prospect rating right now?
I don't know if he's the best prospect, but I do know he might be in all of college football, but he might be the best prospect, at least receiver prospect on his team, which is somewhat controversial because they do have a guy by the name of Jaxon Smith-Njigba who has been pretty inactive throughout this season, and people were expecting him to potentially be a top 10 pick in this class, and Marvin Harrison Jr. has done nothing but continue to show that, you know what, I am the better prospect from this guy, or at least I'm the more available guy. So we are going to have a discussion about should Jaxon Smith-Njigba actually return back to college for another year. But as it pertains to CJ Stroud, the one thing that continues to be very clear, one, he's doing a terrific job of continuing to take care of the ball. Another thing he's doing is making the plays and throws when he needs to. You look at him as a pure prospect. We're talking about somebody who is big, has the arm, has the ability. But you also have to wonder with Coach Day's offense, how much of it is catering to these quarterbacks and making things so simplified for them to where, you know what, you don't have to go above and beyond to be this super heady quarterback or this guy that's making all these NFL throws all over the place, tight window throws, et cetera. It's just, hey, can you make enough throws so when these guys are open, I'm going to spread things out. I'm going to scheme them open. They didn't have as much of a run game yesterday, so they had to lean on the throwing ability from Stroud a little bit more. But I'm curious to see just how much does that gameplay in that offense translate to the NFL. I think that's going to be the big question for CJ Stroud.
No doubt. Ryan, your thoughts on Stroud and younger Marvin Harrison, who, by the way, looks just like Pops. I mean, I know that's like DNA. Like, I get that. I passed science way back in the day. I get that. But, I mean, it's eerie to look in that face mask and go, whoa. I just hope he doesn't end up in Indianapolis cold at some point. Ryan, your thoughts about those two in particular?
You know, I think Stroud is doing what he needs to do. I agree there. I don't see like game changing week to week. Like, he's running what he needs to run. It happens to be that it's uber efficient, and you've got the athletes that can make up for just about anything that might be, you know, slight accuracy ish, where he's leading them to, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, he can only do what he's asked to do. So I have no problem with Stroud. I like Mayan Williams, and I wish they had a little more run game, to tell you the truth, because I think we would be talking more about him if he had more opportunity. So kudos to him. But I'll say this, Marvin this year versus JSN last year, I'm still taking JSN. I still think it was a better overall performance. And that leads me to this year's over. If you're JSN, you got to cut it off. It's done. Because no matter what you do, even he played a little bit last week. If you couldn't play this week, if he comes back next week, it's still going to be, no matter what, a giant asterisk on this season. In terms of the evaluation for the next level, it's going to be, okay, he got back and maybe he made some catches. He made a couple plays, but he was out this whole season. So I think he has to reset it. I think he has to say this season's lost due to injury. I can still be not just what I was, but more. And I know that we're talking about Ohio State being not only a CFB team, but a championship team possibility, right? They could be better next year with him back and run the whole table again. I think that's not only best for Ohio State, I think it's best for JSN. And it might even help Marvin Harrison not get doubled and tripled and all the attention that he'll get next season, if not.
I will say this, Ryan, and you talked about the better prospect between Harrison Jr. and Jaxon Smith-Njigba. And Jaxon Smith, he's a little bit more, I guess, normalized with the size, right? You know, maybe a little bit over 6 foot. We'll see if you're measuring that 6 foot or 6'1". But Marvin Harrison Jr., and I know John talked about kind of how eerie it is that he looks a lot like his dad. He does look like his dad, but like a jumbo-sized version. Yeah. We're talking about a guy that's 6'4". Exactly. So as a pure prospect, I think NFL teams are going to be a little bit more intrigued with that as opposed to Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who, as good as Smith-Njigba is, and we saw that explosive game he had against Utah in the postseason last year, does he have outside speed? Whereas Marvin Harrison Jr., even if he doesn't have the pure outside speed, we know he has that outside size. So I think that's something that might make him a little bit more intriguing as it pertains to them being prospects and being compared to each other moving forward.
And Marvin Harrison Jr., his ball skills outside the numbers, I mean, anywhere really, but outside the numbers, I mean, with that size, I mean, he's got such acumen that I absolutely love to watch. And
a little T. Higgins to his game?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Eric, if I remember, I think T. Higgins was the guy that I had comped Marvin Harrison to at some point. I think he looks a lot like T. Higgins. Yeah. Could you take a really athletic T. Higgins in the top 10 next year? Absolutely. I think there's one thing with JSN's decision that's going to be, two things actually that are going to make this decision for JSN maybe really difficult. And number one is if he comes back, it's not as if those guys are leaving. Julian Fleming, Emeka Egbuka, and Marvin Harrison Jr. are all going to be there. So he's still going to be fighting for targets and catches amongst that group. And the second part of that is Stroud's not going to be there, more than likely. I mean, if Stroud goes back, then, wow. That would be a complete shock. But that's where it gets sort of complicated for him is if he does come back, as opposed to I still think he can end up being a first-round pick. He starts his clock a little quicker. Obviously, he'll have the 5th-year option built into his first-year contract. And maybe a team just says, look, we saw enough from you. We know what you can do. We know you're going to get caught in that mosh pit of receivers and targets, and it's not going to be Stroud. So, come on, let's go. Maybe you end up – and here's the thing, and you guys know how this goes. With receivers, they get pushed down for whatever reason. All of a sudden, the Buffalo Bills – end up losing a receiver in free agency, and he ends up going to a playoff team, and you're like, my goodness. So he's got a really interesting decision at some point to be able to make. And I've stopped over the years going, oh, that's the wrong decision, that's the right decision. The guy's going to make a decision for whatever reason, whether it's family, whether it's money, whether it's prestige, whether it's just I want to get to the league, whatever. He's going to make that decision for his reason. And sure, some of them are going to be bad, some are going to be good. But I've stopped like, man, he shouldn't have done that. He should do that. He just has an interesting decision taking all of those factors into play. And I think that's going to be really tough for JSN. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Penn State side. And when I say Penn State, I mean Penn State and guys that used to play at Penn State. We'll talk about that next on Locked On NFL Draft. But it's time for a word from our friends at BetterHelp. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. And we've talked about this before. Life is so many twists and turns, and things are up, things are down. And how do you handle all of those things? Well, therapy for a lot of people was extremely helpful. And BetterHelp has connected over 3 million people with licensed therapists. It's convenient, secure, and accessible anywhere, 100% online. You could be on vacation overseas. You could set up a meeting with a therapist on BetterHelp, and you're going to have a 30-minute, 45-minute, hour session with a therapist. If you don't love it, you can always try a different therapist. You can go to whatever therapist you want at BetterHelp. Everyone deserves to feel at their best. And if you've never tried therapy before, but you've thought about it, you're like, man, I just don't know. I'm nervous about it. Well, BetterHelp is the best option that you can have. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. You can get a new therapist anytime. No waiting rooms, no traffic. You don't have to go anywhere. You can just be at your house. You can be at the beach. You can be on vacation. No endless searching for the right therapist. Go to BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thanks for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. The guys I mentioned, Penn State, obviously the foe against Ohio State, ended up losing the game 44-31, and I do not want this to be a roughed-up session for Sean Clifford. Sean Clifford is who he is. He is an average to below-average quarterback who made a play here or there, but he got a lot of help from a particular receiver that I want to talk about. And then I have a question that leads to another guy that got roughed up on Saturday, a former Penn State quarterback. But I want to talk about the receiver first. Parker Washington ended up with 11 catches for 179 yards and a touchdown. And here's what's weird, guys. He's 5'11", and he's like 210 pounds. And that's not really the size you're used to from wide receivers. You look at Debo, he's like 6'1", 215. You don't really see Parker Washington, 5'10", 5'11", 215 pounds. I'm not really sure where he fits in the NFL. I just know he fits. And maybe he's just a slot guy. Maybe they try and make him a wide back like they did with Debo because of his ability to run the ball. When I look at Parker Washington, he's got tremendous hands. He's very good in the slot. But he's just a kind of curiosity to me, guys, because he's 5'11", 215, which is really kind of weird, odd size dimensions for a wide receiver. Ryan Tracy, does that bother you at all with a guy like Parker Washington that catches the ball and makes plays after the catch the way that he does?
Doesn't bother me at all. If you actually extrapolate, and I've had this conversation multiple times, you take Tyreek Hill and you blow him up 3 inches, that's exactly what he weighs. The thickness, the density of that body type is certainly applicable in terms of contact in the league and surviving that and extending a career. Like, I have no problem with that. If you make plays, you make plays. And I love the way that you can align them out of the slot in multiple roles. You could pull him back before you could run him out of the H. There's a lot of things you can do with a guy like that.
Eric, your thoughts about a guy like Parker Washington with great hands, but interesting size dimensions?
I think right now the NFL is kind of going almost like basketball, right? You don't see those big centers all the time. That's not a priority in these offenses. NBA basketball is a little bit more positionless, and I think that's the direction that the NFL is going with these receivers, just finding guys that they can just get the ball in his hands. You mentioned Parker Washington in comparison to guys like Debo Samuel. Let's look at other guys recently that have come out and have that similar stature. The kid Rodgers out of Clemson, drafted to the Green Bay Packers. And, you see two different outcomes of how this can be, right? Debo Samuel, very explosive. Everybody said, well, he's not a true receiver. He's not this pure receiver, but he's somebody that's definitely very productive in the NFL, having almost 1,800 yards a season ago. Just figure out different ways to get the ball in his hands, right? Same with Rodgers, and I think that the Green Bay Packers are struggling a little bit more to figure out ways to get the ball in his hands. But with Parker Washington, he's definitely a guy that is going to probably live a little bit more in the slot, whether it's in college right now or at the NFL level. Is he that pure separating guy? Maybe not right now, but can you figure out ways to just scheme him open, whether it's, line him up on the outside, send guys up verse, have him come underneath, pick guys off, catch the ball, get the ball in his hands. And we've seen him break tackles. You saw that in Saturday evening's game where he's breaking tackles, running off for touchdowns. You see that he might have a little bit more acceleration than Rodgers and maybe a little bit closer to acceleration of a Deebo Samuel. And that's something that can really help him at the next level.
Now, a guy that came in, I think they were in the same recruiting class at Penn State, and people forget this. I think about it every time I watch Penn State because I watch Sean Clifford, and I just can't. It drives me insane to watch a team that's got that kind of talent led by a quarterback that just is average or above average. But Penn State had a quarterback come in with Parker Washington, and that guy's name was Will Levis. And Will Levis, I think at Penn State, the game changes. I think it really changes. But James Franklin went with the guy that I think he thought he knew, and Will Levis was looking for an opportunity. He found it at Kentucky. And last year he had Liam Cohen, who had spent a lot of time with the Rams. Cohen under that running that Rams offense, Levis really kind of blew it up. Kentucky was a hot thing last year. Then in the offseason, Will Levis was a hot thing, even though Rich Gangarello was taking over as offensive coordinator calling plays. Last night against Tennessee, I couldn't get Ryan Tracy's face and voice out of my head as I'm watching. And listen, I love Ryan. Ryan's fantastic. But Ryan's the last face and voice that I wanted to hear at about 10 o'clock at night. And all I could hear, they show an overhead shot of Levis throwing an interception on a curl route to his freshman receiver. And the route is not open at all. And yet he tried to force it in there, and it's an interception. He ended up throwing, I think, 3 on the night, and not one of them that I feel like should have been thrown at all. Is there any bloom off the – I don't even want to ask you this, Ryan, because I think I know the answer to you, because it felt like against Tennessee, Will Levis's performance was just confirmation of what you've already said. But I'm going to give you the floor first because I know that was what you said about Levis, and he just continues to kind of fall into it. Your thoughts about Levis, especially roughed up against Tennessee.
Yeah, I think he's feeling the pressure, and I think he's letting his ego and what he hopes to be drive his decision-making. The interesting thing about this, and I had to go back and check and confirm this with two sites that track this, all 3 of those interceptions were unforced. He was not under pressure. He was not under blitz at all. That's just bad decision-making. I thought he was a little slow moving some of his reads. A couple of plays, I'll give him credit. He did move from one side to the other, checked all of his routes. He still made bad decisions. So again, this feels like a kid that was pumped up in the early season. He was in my top 16, so it's partly my fault too. But he's just feeling like he has to push and push and push. I think when he relaxes, he'll be okay.
Croc, do you see that with Levis, the fact that, and not only Levis, but just the quarterbacks? We talked a lot about the quarterback. We've talked a lot about the quarterbacks, no doubt. But this is a class that we should, because there are a lot of draft-eligible quarterbacks that have an opportunity to come in the league and do some things. But I don't know that there has been this, that's the guy, except for maybe Hendon Hooker. That guy showed up every single week, and he'll get his biggest test next week against Georgia. But do you feel like this 2023 class is sort of feeling the pressure, or do you feel like we just haven't gotten to that time for one of them to flourish and really stand out because we still have 3 or 4 weeks left in the regular season? How do you look at this class and Levis in particular?
I think that guys have had plenty of opportunities to stand out, and they just haven't made the most of those opportunities. We see guys like DJ Uiagalelei. Right.
Yeah, you got it.
But
you got
we've seen DJ, right, and we've seen some kind of ups and downs, and we looked at some of these other quarterbacks, and we're going to get into Sam Hartman in a little bit. He's another one of those guys where you see a lot of good, then it's like, oh, you watch and you're like, man, you see some of these valleys that end up being a little bit more concerning, and I think we're seeing that with Will Levis right now, a guy who struggled to throw for 100 yards, and one thing that I know, even Rich Gangarello, the offensive coordinator over at Kentucky, he looks for guys that can elevate the team in situations that might be a little bit less ideal. And there aren't any pass-catching prospects on that team that are expected to go to the next level. You do have a running back with Chris Rodriguez, who I think he does a really good job, but he can't do everything. And at some point, you need Levis to kind of overcome some of his circumstances and at least make some plays. And, hey, okay, lose to Tennessee. They just beat Alabama. Like, that's a legit team. Nobody's expecting you to win. But people are expecting you to not 100% be solely the reason why your team loses. And when you throw 0 touchdowns and not making any throws, you can't move the ball on the ground when people thought that maybe your mobility might be something that offsets some of the things that defenses are able to do with the lack of weapons there. And then you turn the ball over 3 times. That is just less than ideal for a prospect that people were expecting the potential to be a top 10 pick, including me. And now I'm sitting here with egg all over my face because this has gone a complete opposite direction. And, I mean, I'd be surprised right now if this guy is taken in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, no doubt. Another quarterback that was roughed up, and Ryan, you mentioned this before, and I hate this because I'm a big fan of Sam Hartman. I think Sam's got a lot of ability. I think Sam can come to the league and do some things, but he's also in a situation where he's got to prove it every week, and not only did he not prove it this week, it felt like it took 2 steps back.
I don't know if it was 2 steps for me. One of those was deflected because the receiver didn't make a good effort to the ball. Another one was probably an incorrectly run route, to tell you the truth. It looked like he had the out, and that's where he's trying to place the ball. The young receiver did not go there. But all that aside, it was definitely a step back. I just feel like at that point, he wasn't able to regroup like we've seen him do in the past and kind of settle everything back down and get it back on track. I was surprised. I didn't expect Louisville to play that well. So Sam's definitely in this second tier, I would say. I think he and Levis are probably going to be the guys that are competing, not Levis and Hendon now. So like I think there's been a shift here in this quarterback ranking. Okay,
you got 5 seconds to think about this. Well, you got as long as I have to frame this question. I would think whether we have Bryce 1 or CJ 1, Bryce and CJ are probably 1, 2. Yes?
Yes.
You have 5 seconds to think about this. Right now, who's number 3 for you? I think mine's got to be Hendon Hooker. Eric Crocker, who would be number 3 on your quarterback ranking list?
It's got to be Hendon Hooker. And, again, I'm really big on consistency. So you look at CJ Stroud, you look at Hendon Hooker, those guys, I feel like you have less question marks about it. Now, the biggest question mark with Hendon Hooker is obviously going to be age. We're talking about a guy who's like 25 years old. So, but as it pertains to being a quarterback at the NFL level, they might look at it like, hey, man, he's in his maturity prime. So do you want to take the 25-year-old old man? And I say old man in college years, right? Yeah. Prospects years, because really,
like John
I feel like more
years,
the old man, 35 years old. Yeah. But are you going to take the old man at 25 years old, or maybe somebody that still you might say, you know what, there's a little bit more upside still in this guy, even though he's much younger and maybe not as emotionally or mentally mature as Hendon Hooker. But he's got to be, I'd assume, QB3 in his class right now.
Ryan, who's QB3 right now?
You took Hooker on the same argument that I was making in reverse. Like, I think you know what he's going to be. I don't see that upside. Right now, I'd probably be tempted to put Penix up there because I think he's got more upside there with a similar throwing style. Obviously, it's a little bit different. Same size, a guy that can move. There's a lot there that I like. I'm just not 100% sold yet.
All right, we're going to flip it over to some running backs. We got a couple of game balls to hand out. We'll do that next on Locked On NFL Draft. But I got to talk to you about jewelry. And then there are things we know. We know football. There are a lot of you that know fishing. There are a lot of you that know just other sports. What you don't know is jewelry. I can promise you that. I'd like to think I'm as worldly as anybody. I know nothing about jewelry. But the guys over and the people over at Blue Nile can make any celebration even more memorable. It is the original online jeweler. Blue Nile offers the largest selection of independently graded diamonds and pieces priced significantly below traditional retailers. Blue Nile has helped millions of couples create their perfect engagement ring. And let me tell you how it went for me when I went for my engagement ring. We went to the ring store, and my wife just, let me see this. I literally was like her purse. I was just the carry-on. I knew nothing. And I felt bad because I couldn't surprise my wife with it. She knew exactly what she wanted. We went, we got it, and away you go. And I feel bad for that. Don't fall in that situation. Let Blue Nile's assistants help you with everything. Choose the right shape, size, clarity of the diamond that you need. And Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then help you handcraft her perfect one-of-a-kind engagement ring. Look for a piece of fine jewelry to commemorate a special milestone. Let Blue Nile jewelry experts help you 24/7. 100% satisfaction guarantee. All Blue Nile orders are insured and shipped for free in discreet packaging. And make that moment sparkle with Blue Nile. Go to BlueNile.com or use code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. That's Blue, BLUENILE. BlueNile.com, code LOCKEDON to save $50 on your purchase of $500 or more. BlueNile.com, code LOCKEDON. All right, guys, we're not handing out jewelry just yet. That comes in January. when one of these teams will end up taking home the hardware of a hard-earned national championship. But we do get to hand out some diamond-encrusted game balls from this weekend. And we're going to go to the running backs because there are two guys that we have talked about for a while that have really showed it off and absolutely need to be in the discussion for top running back in this class. Zach Charbonnet, UCLA, Blake Corum of Michigan. And they couldn't be built any differently. And they used to be teammates at Michigan. And one of them is 6'1", 220. The other one is he's lucky if he's 5'7", but he's built like a brick house at about 190 pounds. Eric Crocker, make a case for Blake Corum and Zach Charbonnet being RB, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. Make a case for those two from this weekend and what you've seen this season.
These are two guys that came through for me on Prize Picks. I picked both of these guys over in their game, and I only had 2 picks on this little play, and both of those guys hit the over, and it was clear from the jump that they were going to get it. All right, Zach Charbonnet, the question I have now, right, at this point, because we've talked about this guy since last year, and I thought it was kind of weird. Like, man, why would you come back? You're probably not going to improve your draft stock. I thought last year he probably would have went in the 3rd round. I don't think there's any need to go back to college. I was wrong. I'm asking the question now, what does Zach Charbonnet have to do to be considered a round 1 pick? I get it that the value of the running back is not quite there, but if you've taken some of these other guys in recent years in the 1st round, why can't Zach Charbonnet go? He's extremely powerful. He's explosive. The contact balance is there. Even when you know he's getting the ball, he's still getting off. He's breaking off big runs. He's making the strong runs. I think he's putting on display every single week everything that you want to see from a running back. There is no down game from him. Extremely consistent, really showing everything that you want. And I could say some of the same for Blake Corum. We're talking about a guy, and I remember if you go back a couple of weeks, I talked about, like, all right, it's time to get this guy the ball 25-plus times. And it sounds crazy because we know in today's day and age, running backs, they just don't carry the ball a ton of times. Well, he does. And I feel like every week he's hovering around 30 carries, and every single week he is breaking off big runs. And where I'm very impressed with him is you talked about him not being the biggest of backs, right? He might be 5'6". I don't know. He looks extremely short. But when we start talking about the contact balance on him and his ability to kind of really set up some of his moves and think ahead, there was a play yesterday where he only picked up about 4 yards. But there was a guy coming off the edge. He bounced outside, made him miss in the phone booth. And as he bounced, he's already thinking about what my next move is. And he spun off the would-be tackler and then lunged forward to pick up the 1st down. And it's those type of things right there that I think that's going to make him a very intriguing prospect as it pertains to translating this game to the NFL level.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. Ryan Tracy, let me give you a list of teams and see if any of them intrigue you as far as maybe drafting a running back in the 1st round. Now, obviously, we're halfway through the NFL season, but Baltimore, J.K. Dobbins can't really stay healthy, the way they run the ball with Lamar. Tennessee, now they drafted Hassan Haskins last year. New York Jets lost Breece Hall to an ACL. Dallas Cowboys got Tony Pollard. Don't know what Zeke's going to have left. Minnesota, does Dalvin Cook need somebody to help him? Your Kansas City Chiefs have done the 1st-round running back thing. Don't know if it worked out for them, so I don't know if they do it. The Giants, who knows what happens with Saquon Barkley. Buffalo, they've drafted a few running backs in Philadelphia. They got Miles Sanders. But do you think any of those teams, I mentioned those teams because those are teams kind of in the playoff mix, they'll be drafting at the bottom of the 1st round. Do you think any of those teams would have an interest, and maybe not the specific team, but you think they would have an interest in a running back, be it Zach Charbonnet, be it Bijan Robinson, be it a Devin A-Chain, be it a Jahmyr Gibbs? Do you think any of those teams would be looking at a running back, considering one other factor that the NFL is, I don't want to say going back to being a running league, but you're seeing a bunch of running backs really step up and do some things in the NFL. Do you think any of those teams will be intrigued by a running back at the back end of the 1st round?
I agree. The pendulum is swinging back to the run game. And I might even be tempted to put Charbonnet as number 1. But RB1 is a 2nd-round pick. There is no 1st-round pick at running back. There just isn't. It's not the value. We've seen too many times, whether it's injury with ATN, whether it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire not working out on a team that I cover every day. It's just not the investment that needs to be made. I think Bijan Charbonnet can argue. I'm just saying from my perspective, I think you can argue who's number 1, but I think number 1 is a high 40s, low 50s pick.
I am definitely not one I don't want to say overreact, but definitely, when it comes to the value of the running back, I do think that, you can get production out of these guys much later. But when you talk about Travis Etienne, and as of right now, we're recording this while the game in London is currently playing, and Travis Etienne, 17 carries, 122 yards. He's catching the ball out the backfield as well. He's hovering close to about 150 yards on the game, and they still have an entire quarter to play. He's really kind of carrying this Jaguars offense right now and being a safety blanket and outlet for quarterback Trevor Lawrence. So I do think maybe if you have a veteran quarterback, you don't need that type of running back as much, or even to draft a guy or spend that type of capital. If you're Patrick Mahomes, it's like, well, I don't really necessarily need Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But as it pertains to maybe some of these younger guys, and it doesn't have to be first round, but maybe early second round, and you want to give a guy that safety blanket, I think that's where these guys come into play. And we're going to see how the young New York Jets handle losing Breece Hall, because he's a guy, again, second-round pick. He was everything and more that they wanted out of a running back, and he was kind of carrying that offense, and they were leaning on him. They won a game where their quarterback threw it for 100 yards, all right? How do you win when your quarterback's throwing for 100 yards? Good running game, good receiving ability out of your running back, and playing defense. And I think guys like Zach Charbonnet and some of these other guys that are, Bijan Robinson, they can do that. So I'm with you on, just in theory, the value of the running back position. But, man, there's some really talented guys I think can really help some younger quarterbacks.
I agree with you. I do think there is a marriage, and specifically for the Jets and Breece Hall, there's a marriage of styles as well. If you can change it up by spending another second or even a third-round pick and get that kind of production, I'm with it. But I don't have the game up, Eric, so let me just throw it back at you one more time. Etienne's having a nice morning. How's it helping the team? Are they winning? Is this driving their offense to the point where they're winning ball games? Tell me.
I'll say this, Eric, I'll answer that. I saw Etienne in Jacksonville, and it when he was in the game, for some reason, they went back to Robinson in the game against – we couldn't stop Etienne. When they went back to Robinson, that's when our defense grabbed the foothold. I think that Etienne is going to continue to do this for Jacksonville, take pressure off Lawrence, and it might force some teams to take a look. I think the one thing, if you are going to draft a running back in the first round, then that running back better be a guy that can catch 65, 70 passes too. So you're getting bang for your buck as a receiver. You're getting bang for your buck as a three-down back. You better have that. I mean, Christian McCaffrey went 7. I still think that's crazy to think about, but Christian McCaffrey caught 88 balls or whatever it was. He ended up catching his first or second year in the league. So if you draft the receiver, that dude better catch 65, 75 passes, somewhere in that range, to be a factor in all facets of the offense. This can't just be Earl Campbell like it used to be. Hey, you're going to grind it out 30 times a game. This has got to be somebody that impacts the passing game as well. And I think these guys are going to eventually be able to do that. There's no doubt about that. Now, we thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. We will be back this week. We'll get a review of Malik Willis. I will see him up close on Sunday. We'll break down all the rookies. We'll have our Friday night draft later in the week, so keep it locked right here on Locked On NFL Draft. For Eric, Ryan, I'm John. We'll see you next time, and as always, let's go.